feminine energy, or being in control, or being surrendered, or being more light energy or dark energy, that we're playing in the polarity and playing in the differing of power, where I'm giving over power, Ian is giving over power in the dynamic, and playing really deeply with really some really fun psychological stuff that becomes a really big turn on.
And Tony talks obviously a lot about masculine, feminine, and really being able to own those energies. And again, those aren't gender related for us. Those are just about what's your energy in the bedroom. And kink, when you explore it, even in its most innocent, basic level, is an access to being able to explore those energies of what Jai is talking about dominance, submission, who's in control, because a lot of the turn on around sexuality is in that polarity, and being able to keep that dynamic really strong, no matter who's holding the power and who's being submissive, male, female, whatever. That's where like the supercharge of the erotic energy gets turned up.
Yeah. And so then the second type is someone who's turned on by sensation. And this could be very intense sensation, say spanking or hair pulling or a flogger or something, some tool or implement that you may be using, or maybe it's the feeling of the ropes on your body.
Also, like constriction is a part of the physical turn on for a lot of kinkies, of like being heavily restricted, heavily constricted.
And that's Ian's main thing that we discovered, was he really loved the sensation of the ropes and the play of being bound. And being able to play with that and that dynamic and learning the skill sets to do that was a huge game changer in our relationship, because I felt before discovering that he was very deeply kinky, I felt like I couldn't turn him on. Like the sensual was one thing that was a lead in, but when we started tapping into his kinky, I saw turn on in his body like I'd never seen before. And this whole time I'm thinking it was me. And now I'm like, oh, it's so easy. All I have to do is get out some ropes, lay it on the bed, leave a little note that says for tonight. And we've got instant turn on like I've never seen before. And it was so simple, but it wasn't until we recognized it and discovered it and talked about it, even talking about it can turn Ian on. Just like setting up what are our agreements around the container of consent in a session or scene that we're going to do that ties in the kinky can get him so aroused that we don't finish the conversation. So now got him coming towards me, which was a huge shift in our relationship, and it started just turning everything around.
Yep. It's interesting how you combine several too. You know, the physical kinky with sensual, you combine those two things together and you get that sort of custom scenario that you know is going to turn him on. And for you, right, combining energetic and sexual, that also lends itself to a clear scenario. So it's almost like, you know, by sort of mixing and matching the different parts of you, you can come up with some solutions, really.
Yeah, you're tapping into advanced work here. Because, if we had several hours, we'd parts to get to a thing that we call blueprint stacking, which is this exactly what you're talking about. Because we know we're not all just one of these blueprints. So it's the ability to weave that together to make this incredible, turn on for your partner or for yourself, and knowing yourself well enough that you can actually ask for getting your needs met.
It's a hack into our sexuality.
It's a super hack.
For sure. I didn't talk about the shadows about the kinky. So the kinky shadow, Ian did mention, is shame. And it's a lot of questioning yourself. Why am I turned on by this?
This is wrong. This is weird. I'm bad.
You know, you're going into that conversation of making yourself bad for the things that really turn you on and that bring you that freedom of sexual expression and that celebration of who you are as a sexual being. And then another piece is when there's a lot of shame and a lot of hiding, you can have something that's a turn on that turns into kind of a neurosis, or it turns into like you get so fixated on it, it becomes your only route to pleasure. So it could be something like Jack Morin in his book, The Erotic Mind, talks about a person who's turned on by a yellow raincoat. And the only way they can get turned on is by wearing a yellow raincoat. Well, this becomes a challenge when it's your only pathway to pleasure. I want everybody to have multiple pathways to pleasure, because what happens is when we do the same thing over and over again, it becomes this little groove, and the groove eventually becomes a rut. And that pattern, that rut, then becomes a grave in your sexuality because you only have one pathway. And having multiple pathways then opens you up to all kinds of discovery, especially if you're single and you're listening to this. You want to have multiple pathways because you never know what kind of blueprint you may walk into in your next relationship.
Sure. No, it's fascinating too that you mentioned that, because Tony actually has a concept called a blueprint for happiness. And it's the idea that we have an idea in our head, a very specific idea of what will cause us happiness. So, I should be married by a certain age. I should have a house by a certain age. I need this kind of job. I need these kinds of friends. And if you don't match that blueprint exactly, then you feel disappointed, right? You feel like, oh, I haven't succeeded. And there are so many people who have these very firm blueprints for happiness. And guess what? They'll never achieve happiness because they don't have control over all of those elements. So right. I really, would love to stress, for sexual, in terms of sexuality, but also in terms of, just your daily lives, flexibility in your rules, right? The rules that you need to meet in order to feel fulfillment and successful, those need to be extremely flexible.
And that brings me to a point of our blueprints show us, if anything, where we're limited and where we're inflexible. So I love that you brought that up, because there are 4 key things to working with our blueprints: learning how to feed your blueprint so that you are actually fed, and then resourced and can give more, and also feel, you're more satisfied in life throughout life. Speaking the blueprints as if they are different languages. What are the words that you use, the body language you use to honor someone's blueprint, healing the shadows of the blueprints. And the last piece is learning to expand yourself so that therefore you are able to give and receive in each one of the blueprints. And I'll say this is an ongoing journey. I started out energetic, sexual. I've learned how to become a shapeshifter, giving to people because of my work. However, in receiving, I still really struggle with sensual and kinky blueprints. And so I'm still learning how to expand into those and get rid of my rules, really work with my rules around them, because there's still fear and vulnerability. The sensual blueprint makes me feel so vulnerable in my femininity when my heart is open and I feel like, oh, there's risk of getting hurt. And the kinky blueprint is super scary because of past trauma, where my body can interpret it. Instead of Ian being my lover, Ian becomes my abuser. And so I found a lot of healing actually working in the kinky blueprint. And I also am still developing my trust and ability to receive there based on history. So there's still healing for me to do. And it is an ongoing journey. I've been on this journey most of my life and will continue to be on this journey until the day I die. And I think a lot of people think, oh, I'm going to work on my sexuality and that's going to be done. As opposed to your sexuality is constantly changing. Esther Perel says we don't have one sexuality, we have multiple sexualities.